Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start the second lesson on conflict, because we're going to talk about conflict this week. I know we've already done one, but we're going to do another one. So one of the things that I noticed when we started the last lesson on conflict was after I ended it, I went over some of the problems that my girls had done. Like I gave those 10 prompts. And what I found, and you'll notice that on Tessa's I had a bunch of little red marks. What I found when I went through what they had come up with was that they had somehow misunderstood, which is clearly not their fault. I hadn't done a great job explaining that conflict is less about something bad happening, which is what we tend to think of it as. If you say there was a conflict, you think there was a fight, something bad happened. When I say conflict for stories, I don't necessarily mean something bad. I just mean that a choice has to be made. So maybe there should be a better word for it. But a lot of times there's something bad. A lot of times it's a choice between two bad things. But not always. Sometimes it could be a choice between two good things. But just saying something bad happened, like someone lost their job or someone's parents are getting divorced. Those are bad things that happen, but they don't necessarily create the type of conflict that we need in a book. So I was going to give a couple of examples. And one of the things that I assigned as the reading report in the last one was that you would pick the opening conflict and then also identify what the main conflict of the book is, because they're not always the same. There may be initial conflict in a story that then transforms into a different type or a deeper conflict that goes for the course of the story. So one of the things is that the conflict, one of the things I haven't explained yet is that the conflict that you choose can't just be something that happens and then something else happens. So you can't have, let's say, someone loses their job, and so then they have to decide. The choice would be, because they lost their job, do they proceed to look for their dream job, which may not pay as well or may take them longer and be more risky, or do they just try and find another job that's just like the other ones that they've always had? So they have that choice to make. That could be the opening conflict of your book, but it can't just be that happens and then in chapter 2 the story moves on to something completely different. Because if that's true, then the conflict isn't driving the story. So that means the next thing that happens in the story has to do with that initial conflict that you set up. So you can't say the initial conflict is, I lost my job and now I have to pick. Do I move out of state for another job, a dream job maybe, uprooting my children? Or do I stay here and just look for a boring job like the one that I had before? That could be your opening. And then in chapter 2, you go to, oh, dragons have arrived from another planet and are invading. Well, that doesn't have anything at all to do. If your book is about that, start there. You've had a false start. So your initial opening conflict has to lead into the next step of the story. If it doesn't, your conflict is a false start, and we don't want to have that either, because you're making a promise to your readers when you start with a story, and you need to fulfill that promise when you actually write the story. Okay, so I was going to use Harry Potter as an example. Okay, to try and explain what I mean when I say that this opening conflict has to lead into the conflict for the rest of the book. In other words, I guess another way to say what I'm saying is your opening conflict has to lead to the next step. So you can't just have something happen and then something else happen, because then you're back to a sequence of events, right? So the next thing in the book has to happen because of the choice that they made. So they have to make this choice, that's their conflict, then that choice leads to something else. Probably another conflict, right? At least to some other problem. Like they say, hey, I'm going to take my dream job. I can't wait. I'm so excited. And then they move and uproot their family to take this dream job. And then they find out that the dream job isn't really a dream job. Or they lose their dream job right after they get it and now they've uprooted their family. Or something else happens that requires another choice and another choice, because that's what a story is. It's a sequence of choices. And that's how you discover who the character is. We're kind of getting into some other stuff here, but let's talk again. I'm going to focus on the conflicts so that we can, because I want us to try and identify those so that when we're creating our stories, so many people come to me and they say, how do you get your ideas for your stories? And the answer is the initial idea, I think, is the hardest part. Finding conflict in that initial idea is hard. Coming up with a unique and interesting initial idea is somewhat difficult. After that, the general storytelling rules will help make sure that your story is good. As long as you know that that first decision has to lead to something else, then it kind of leads you down the path. Does that make sense, Tessa? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about when we talked a little bit about Harry Potter last time. When Harry Potter opens, you know that his uncle and aunt are really unfair, right? Like they treat, what's the kid's name? I don't know. Dudley or something. They treat him really well. He's so wonderful. We just love him. We give him everything. He needs 92 presents because he had 91 last year or whatever. Whereas Harry Potter is stuffed in a closet and ignored and shunted away, and they don't want anyone to see him, right? So they obviously are not treating him well, and there's conflict there, and that creates sadness in his life because he is a good and kind person, as everyone should be. But at a certain point, he needs to learn to stand up for himself, right? So that conflict starts when he gets what?
A letter.
A letter. A letter comes. And he got a letter, and he goes to open it, and what happens?
Dad.
They snatch it away, and he's like, what? And all of a sudden, his desire to be nice and polite and make them happy is at odds with what he wants, which is that letter. So he has to decide, does he make them happy like he always has and let them be horrendous? Or does he try to get that letter that he really wants, and he wants to know what it is, right? And so now he has to make a decision, and what does he do?
He gets the letter.
He decides he wants the letter, but do they get in the way?
Yes.
So yes, so they are both causing the choice by preventing him from getting the letter, and they're the bad guys too. So in this instance, the conflict is a villain, and that villain is stopping him from doing what he wants to do. And so he has to try and figure out how to surmount that problem, right? But once he does, and actually, if you think about it, the choice, he keeps trying to get to the letter, but he keeps getting foiled. He's not strong enough or able to get to that letter. So what ends up happening? Hagrid shows up and delivers the message, right? And so Hagrid tells him, Harry, why aren't you ready? It's time for us to go, or whatever. And he's going to whisk him away, right? And when that happens, you would think, oh, good, the conflict's gone. All Harry Potter's problems, poof, he's been taken easily from this family that was so awful to him, right? Or all of his problems over.
Instead, he who's not been named is like, this is the perfect time to strike.
Well, so he's been safe in the Muggle world, protected where Dumbledore has put spells around his home, right? And that's why he's there. But now, so now he doesn't even know that he is now open to attack from Voldemort. But also, there's other small conflicts, and each one leads to the next. So our initial conflict is, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about this wizarding world, and how am I going to navigate it? And he has to make a choice almost immediately. And they give you a little beat. J.K. Rowling gives you a second to kind of get your footing on the train, and he meets Ron, and he meets Hermione, and then there's a decision. And what's his decision? Something's put on his head, boop, and he has to decide what?
If he wants to go to Gryffindor or Slytherin.
Does he want greatness, right? And we've already seen that Malfoy is funny and makes fun of others, and people like him, and his family is wealthy. And Ron is kind of a fumbly, bumbly, redheaded doofus, right? And so who should he pick? And what does Harry Potter choose?
Fumbly,
he
bumbly.
Picks, even if Hermione and Ron may not be the most impressive bunch, he chooses, and the Sorting Hat gives him, remember, it requires a choice. So what does the Sorting Hat do? It gives him this choice, and you see Harry Potter make that same choice over and over and over throughout the series. He's given the opportunity to do what's easier. He's given the opportunity to do what's cooler, and he chooses over and over, and that choice that he makes results in the next part of the story. He chooses Gryffindor, and now he's here in Gryffindor, and he's kind of a nobody. And he finds that unlike Hermione, all of the magic stuff doesn't just come naturally to him. And he has a villain, right? Snape is right there making his life hard, right? And so he has these outside forces, and each time the decision he makes leads to another decision, another conflict, another choice, right? Does he want to do what technically he's supposed to do to be good at school? Or does he want to do the thing that he thinks he knows is right? Even though maybe he's wrong, but he thinks he's right, right? So he keeps having to make these decisions. Does he trust his friends and put them at risk, or does he leave them alone and do it on his own? And sometimes he makes the right decision, and sometimes he makes the wrong one, but it leads to the next part of the story. It's not just like, and another thing happens to happen, and another thing, they lead to each other. Does that make sense?
He got a dragon. No, this is a bad story. He got a dragon. His dog is on fire.
Yeah, because they don't have anything to do with one another, right? They're independent. Now,
Unless
one of the things,
sets the dog
when we were reading Dora's examples yesterday, or maybe I was reading Tessa's, and we were talking about
You didn't read mine.
Okay. When we were reading examples yesterday, one of the things that you pointed out was, wow, the way that you phrase them, it sounds like the back cover of a book. And so one of the things that I did is after I wrote my first 2 books, they were both really bad. I didn't know what I was doing. I tried to write the back cover copy, except when you're not getting the book published, when you're looking for an agent, that back cover copy is called a query letter. So I was trying to do that. I was trying to write up the little blurb that would go on the back of the book to get an agent interested. So he would ask for my book and I could send it to them. And I realized when trying to write that I hadn't written a very good book, because if you can't figure out what choices to put in there, if you don't have the conflict to show on the back cover, you got a problem with your story. So one of the things I started doing is, before I write my book, I start writing what's the conflict and how does that conflict lead to the next one, and how does that feel the overarching, what is the overarching conflict of the book, of the whole story, okay? Now, we're not going to be writing a book in here, but the general concept is the same. So I thought that I would really quickly read, before we read your conflicts, because I kind of gave them 4 new prompts. So I'm sorry if this is confusing. Your parent or guardian can go over any of them with you. Your assignment today could just be to write these 4 new prompts. But the new prompts that I gave them were, what were they? Money,
health, love, and time.
Love and time. So money, health, love, and time. And honestly, almost all the stories that we'll read have something to do with one of those 4 categories. So they're a little bit broader categories for you to come up with a prompt for than the more specific, like a shoe or whatever. So I think this also kind of gives you an idea of what types of general categories the conflicts will fall in. And so we'll talk about theirs in a second, but I want to read the backs of these, and I want you guys to tell me after I've read it, if from the now middle grade books don't tend to have a long, you can see on the back of this, there's just like 2 lines. Let's see if, I don't know, I haven't even looked at these, this is my bomb, but I'm guessing that from these 2 lines, you can see sort of what the conflict of the book might be. It says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the grumpiest dwarf of all? So normally in Snow White, it's mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the loveliest of them all or something, right? And so the conflict there is between, fairest. Snow White is now the most beautiful, and the evil queen is angry because she was the most beautiful. And so that's the conflict in that one, right? So this one is, who's the grumpiest dwarf of all? And the second question, or the second line is, for the first time ever, hear the real story of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs from the hero himself, Grump the dwarf. So we may actually not have, maybe the conflict is the same, the conflict against Snow White, but I think that there is some conflict between Grump, or the grumpy of the dwarves, and the other 6 dwarves, right? Mm-hmm. They're like happy, lucky, happy, but I don't know what all their names are, but they're all generally kind of funny and upbeat. And then there's Grumpy, right? He's the one who is always upset. So he reacts in a different way than most of the other dwarves react, which means he might have conflict with some of those. When they say, let's do this to help her, let's go after her, he might say, why would we do that? That's a dumb idea. I don't want to, right? Because he's crabby and grumpy. Okay, so I don't know. We'll have to look. That one isn't quite as clear, but I do think that there's some conflict implied when it says, who's the grumpiest dwarf of all? Why is he the one who's unhappy when everyone else is? Okay. In fact, one of the dwarves' names is Happy, I think. All right, so then this is Wings of Fire, the Dragonette Prophecy. This may not be the first one.
That's the first one.
It is the first one. Okay, so it says, the Dragonettes are coming to save the day. Clay has lived his whole life under the mountain. The mud-winged Dragonette knows that war is raging between the dragon tribes and the world outside, a war that he and 4 other Dragonettes are destined to end, according to the mysterious prophecy they've been taught. So do we have a conflict yet?
Yeah.
He's always lived in one place. This Dragonette knows there's a war. And then you find out that he and 4 others are supposed to end the war, and there's a prophecy. Now let's see if it gives us any more details about this particular person, because usually it's one person's point of view. The 5 chosen Dragonettes were stolen from their homes while they were still eggs and hidden away for years to fulfill the prophecy. Okay, now I think this is where it turns, because this is the second paragraph. It says, not every Dragonette wants a destiny, and when danger threatens one of their own, Clay and his friends may choose freedom over fate, leave the mountain, and set the dragon world on a course no one could have predicted. So they were kind of held aside, and they were told, this is what you're supposed to do. So they were given a path, right? Mm-hmm. Your path is to what?
Save the world.
To save the world. So up till that point, the conflict, as I defined it, requiring a choice, isn't really there, I guess. And I'll tell you guys, there's one other thing I wanted to cover today, and it's the illusion of choice that I'll get to in a second. It's one of the most common mistakes that new writers make, okay? But at the end here, it says, not every Dragonette wants a destiny. So the choice, actually, that looked illusory, and actually, maybe this is a good time for me to say it. So one of the things that you see most commonly with new writers, and I had this problem, one of the agents would ask me, or one of the editors would ask me, they would say, so what is the choice that your character has to make? And I would say, oh, well, you know, my main character has to do this or she'll die. well, okay, Emmy, you have to eat this apple or you'll die. Do you really have a choice? You're just going to eat the apple. You have to either stab this person or you'll die. Well, it's the main character. So if they die, the story's over. So is that much of a choice?
No.
Not really, right? Like, I mean, maybe they'll come up with a third alternative that no one's thought of, maybe. But it doesn't really show us a lot of a choice here, right? Like it's try and fight the big bad or you die. Well, then they're going to try and fight the big bad. Right? Like, that's it. That's not really a choice. It's just you're telling me what the action is. And you're telling me what the stakes are, sort of like their life is on the line. But unless I love this character, I don't care about that. So that is what we call an illusory choice. You haven't really set up a conflict. You've just said they might die. So you're trying to appeal to, I should be worried. But you're not actually giving me conflict in the sense that I'm saying, pick between two bad things or two good things, right? Like they have to decide. We're not really getting that. We're just getting, it's going to be scary and action filled. Okay, well, we get a lot of that in Hollywood, by the way. Movies that at the end you're like, well, I guess it was good, but you didn't really care because there wasn't a difficult decision that had to be made, right? They just kind of fought everyone they could and raced in their cars as fast as they could until they died. Okay, like, that's not really a compelling story. So here you see that they took what would have been an illusory choice. These dragons have to save the world or they all die. And so does the world, right? Or the choice is maybe they'd prefer to be free and who cares if the other dragons die? So maybe they run. And then is that someone you can get behind and cheer for? I don't know, maybe. Let's see. So that gives you, it takes the illusory choice and makes it more of a choice, okay? So refugee on the back doesn't have anything but quotes, so that one was a dud. Let's see if this has anything. Okay, Howl's Moving Castle says, Sophie has the great misfortune of being the eldest of 3 daughters. So you're thinking, I feel like there's conflict in that first sentence because I'm wondering, that's more of a hook than conflict, but I'm wondering why is it a great misfortune to be the oldest? I think in general being the oldest is great because you boss the other kids around, right? Tessa will probably agree that being the youngest is hard, right? Because other people are always trying to tell you what to do.
It's hard being the middle child.
And the middle child, but the oldest is great, right? So it says, she's destined to fail miserably should she ever leave home and seek her fate. It says, but when she unwittingly attracts the ire of the Witch of the Waste, Sophie finds herself under a horrid spell that transforms her into an old lady.
What?
Ugh. So now she attracts the attention of someone and becomes an old lady. Her only chance at breaking it lies in the ever-moving castle in the hills, the Wizard Howl's castle. To untangle the enchantment, Sophie must handle the heartless Howl, strike a bargain with a fire demon, and meet the Witch of the Waste head on. Along the way, she discovers there's far more to Howl and herself than first meets the eye. So it's telling you that she felt like she was doomed to have no future, nothing exciting anyway, because she was the oldest daughter. And in all the fairy tales, it's always the youngest daughter who has a great and exciting story. Okay, the youngest. And so something interesting happens because she immediately goes out and gets cursed. She's under a spell and she's an old lady.
Mom,
and so now she could just be an old lady. Poor Dora, destined to nothing good. Now you're an old lady.
Good.
And then it gives you some information that she may discover that there's more to being the eldest and that maybe she does have a future. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about yours. Since Dora didn't get to go before, we'll read hers. So here's your first one. Dora's prompt was money for number 1, and it says, why don't you read it? I'd been saving for weeks or something.
And I only had to earn 3 more to get the deluxe pet package. I've been saving for weeks. Amber, my little sister, yells, do you have any money? I broke Mom's vase.
Okay, so what is the choice that was set up in that?
You have to choose between if you want your mom and sister to be happy or if you want the deluxe pet package.
So she basically has finally saved up the money that she wants for the thing that her heart desires, and she has to decide whether to be a good sister and give the money to her sister, who is probably going to be in trouble with their mother, or whether she wants to stick with what she needs for herself. And then would she be happy knowing that she left someone else in the lurch?
No.
Well, no, I don't know. I'm just saying that's
Maybe,
the question. Will she be happy with her thing? Is she selfish enough to want that? So that's good. You'd set up a choice. So for health, you said, today everything was great until it wasn't. My mom is in the ICU because of my dad. Jeez. And my dad is
coming to finish off my mom and kill me.
Oh my goodness. Now I'm forced to choose between
Running for my life or protecting my
we're
mom.
protecting my mom. Okay, so we have gone right into thriller territory here. So apparently we have abusive parents, mom's in the hospital, and she can either stay to try and protect her mom as a little kid, or she can run. My goodness. I might posit a third option here that you call 911 and let them intervene. But all right, so here, but that's good. You set up a choice there, a scary choice. Love is a tricky thing. My house is on fire and my brother is collapsed on the floor and the other side of the house is my sister's. I only have time to get one out. Okay, so now you have to decide. You have to choose between, this is like Sophie's choice. You have to choose between who? Your brother?
My brother or my sisters.
Or your sisters. Well, we know what you pick. Your sisters are lighter anyway. Oh, what? Okay, all right. So time. I only have 24 hours to live and I can spend them all with my family or I can spend them alone. But if I spend it with my family, they're doomed to die too. But if I'm alone, I'll just disappear and they'll never know what happened to me. That's your best one right there. Okay, so that kind of feeds into the next assignment for you guys. Okay, your next assignment is to take your best, and I'll go over the girls once we turn off the video. Your next assignment is to take these 4 prompts or 10 or whichever ones you use and to turn one of these into a 1-page story.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be long, but you have to take your idea and I'll help you pick one.
we have
Emmy,
to
why don't you
finish
share one?
the
But I don't want
story?
these to get too long. So read me your
I'll do
your
time.
favorite one. Okay.
I discovered a machine that controls time. I could have everything I ever wanted, but I had to sacrifice someone special.
Wow. So the machine controls time and you can control time, which means you can get whatever you want. But in order to use the machine, you have to kill someone?
No, you have to sacrifice someone really special.
Does
Like-
that mean kill someone?
Like Thanos had to do.
You guys are kind of disturbed. Okay, so that's your decision. If you give up someone, like Thanos had to do in the Avengers, if you give up someone special, then you get this machine that can control time, right?
That would.
Or maybe it powers it. Okay.
Oh, you could go back in time and just grab the person and be
No,
like,
you could
No,
sell the
you
machine
can't
for
save that
less
one
money.
person, huh? I'm assuming you can't save that one person because then that's a
No. Yeah, because then the time
oh,
machine doesn't work.
it's
okay, because it
mean.
stops working. All right, so that's interesting. So we're going to go ahead and close this off. But your assignment for the next one is going to be to take one of these prompts that you did and then to turn that prompt into a 1-page story. Okay, and then we're going to work on the conflict in that story and where, so tomorrow we'll talk about where could that conflict take you next. So I want you guys to be thinking with the one that you pick, is this something that then lends itself to an ongoing conflict or the next step in the story? So I want you guys to think about this conflict and how it could impact the future and where that story might be going based on this one. Okay, does that make sense?
Nope.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna turn this off.
Can you see my face in it?